Hello and welcome to our first PMQs. My name is Alex Sargent.
Hi, my name is Raj Ladwell.
And we're going to be asking a few MPs, namely Lembit Öpik, Theresa May and Denis MacShane, what they think about young people's Prime Minister's questions, i.e. questions that are specifically for young people or related to them this week. Right, we'll start first of all then with our first question. Right, this was raised by your leader, Lembit. What's the government doing to help reduce house prices for young people generally, really? Can we start with Theresa? What do you think about this? I mean, what's your party's policy?
Well, one of the policies that we have to try and help young people is actually to look at more shared ownership schemes so that we can enable young people to get their foot on the property ladder. The problem the government's got is that things like social housing bill under this government have actually been significantly lower than they have been in the past, and so we're not seeing the houses coming through that key workers and others are able to get access to.
And Denis, what do you think about this?
Hugely important. When I left university, I bought my first two-bedroom flat for £4,000. Can you imagine that? And that's what it was like in the early 1970s, because we were building hundreds of thousands of houses each year. Now we've stopped because too many councils won't give planning permission. Too many people complain if a new house is built in a big giant garden. That's called garden grabbing. And you've got this kick away the ladder. We're all right, Jack. The next generation can wait, and I think that's wrong. We need to build houses, break these planning laws, and say to people, get more houses up for the next generation.
And Lembit, I mean, your leader raised it, but what's your party going to do about it?
Well, what's interesting is the Labour Party and the Conservatives have pretty much been running the country for the last few decades, and yet, despite the hand-wringing, we've got this huge problem. We do think that shared ownership schemes should be introduced. Also, there are over 1 million empty homes at the moment, houses and flats which could be used, which aren't being used for a number of reasons. We bring that back in. I think the third thing is we have to make absolutely sure that people aren't put into a position where they put 3/4 of their disposable income into rents. So we have to make sure that there is state building of houses too. All of that costs money. That's why it hasn't been done. But if we don't invest now, then we're going to have an even bigger homelessness problem in the future.
And the Prime Minister's answer to the question was a bit... Well, what do you make of the answer to his question, Raj? It was a bit skew-whiff, wasn't it?
Well, maybe a bit for people like me who's a bit iffy on the subject. It wasn't clear for me.
It wasn't very clear. I mean, Denis, what do you have to say about that? It wasn't very clear, the answer.
Well, I think the fundamental problem remains this, that there are councils up and down the country, people want to build houses, builders want to build houses, and yet councils, very often Liberal Democrat, very often Tories, sometimes Labour, say, we'll stop, we won't give you planning permission.
Okay, we'll have a quick
There are housings being built, but there are problems in areas like the constituency I represent, where if you build even a small one-bedroom house, actually it's not affordable, even for a lot of young people. But the Prime Minister's answer was, as you say, a bit skew-whiff. It would seem to be all over.
We'll leave it at that, Lembit. We'll come back to you and give you a response on the next another question. Raj, you've got another question for us.
Right, in the news this week, women have been encouraged to stop drinking during pregnancy, while binge drinking is at its highest, and it's ever increasing. What are you gonna do to help combat this? Help combat young people getting access to alcohol underage, or even when they are old enough? How are they going to stop people getting drunk and disorderly at all manners of the night?
Lembit, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, it's about education, it's about altering our culture. Tax isn't going to do it. Putting 50p in a bottle of whiskey isn't going to change people's behaviour. But it's about looking at our European colleagues, the other countries, and saying, well, why doesn't this happen there? In effect, they're taught to be much more responsible about alcohol and to treat it like a drug, because it is a drug. And I think if you do that from an early age, then people are more likely to be rational. But you're right to say this is a big problem in this country. We're not going to fix it in 1 year. I don't actually directly blame the Labour Party for this either, or indeed the Conservatives. But working together, maybe we can have a more responsible approach within schools, and over a period of many years, we can alter the problem.
And Theresa, what do you think?
Well, I think there is an issue about education because it is about a culture that has grown up. But I think government can do some things. And I was disappointed with the Chancellor's budget because, yes, he put money on, he put tax up on beer and whiskey and other spirits and wine and so forth. What we would have liked to seen him do was actually put the tax up on those drinks that are specifically those that tend to be used by young people who are binge drinking. So we would put the tax up on Alco Pops, on strong beer, strong cider, but use the money that's raised to actually reduce the tax on low strength alcohol and try and have some impact that way.
And Denis, I mean, why wasn't specifically alcopols targeted, do you think, for the budget?
Well, very simply, whenever you put a tax on one drink, people just switch to another one. If you lower the tax on low-strength beers, people will just drink twice as much. We've got two big problems to face. One is example. When you read in all the celeb magazines, in the popular papers, of people piling out of nightclubs, very often the upper-class people, absolutely racked. I'm not quite sure if I can finish the phrase, the adjective. When you look at the Bullingdon Club in Oxford, where people just get blind drunk and are proud of it, what example is that to set? The other thing we should do is move to the Canadian model of social reference pricing, which is you don't have the supermarkets offering beer almost for nothing. You gently do lift the prices, but it's example. And when people look at MPs who are proud of being drunk, that also is a huge problem we have to face.
Right, and brings us to our last question then. We found in the newspapers the other day this new website. I think it's Miss Bebo or Miss Pimbo or something. Miss Bimbo, that's the one. I mean, what is the government doing, and what are the other parties going to do about reducing this sort of activity? I mean, we read that all these sites have got to be regulated and all the rest of it, and they encourage young people, young girls specifically, to literally, lose weight and get plastic surgery. I mean, as young as 9. What's going to be done about this, Theresa?
It's very difficult. I mean, first of all, the issues around the internet, of course, because the whole basis of the internet was that it was open and there was easy access. But it's not just about these sorts of websites. There are two issues here. One is about the image we're presenting about what young girls should be aspiring to. And sadly, that image is one which, as you say, encourages them to try to lose weight, with all the potential problems of eating disorders that comes. But on the other side is this sexualisation of our children, sort of at too young an age. Choosing to show images that suggests that young girls should be trying to emulate this sort of sexy image that is presented on websites like that. So there are issues around education, there are issues around trying to ensure that the role models that young girls use are not the super thin, skinny people which potentially is going to lead them into problems with eating disorders, but actually give them some other role models to aspire to be like.
Okay, and Denis, what do you have to say about this policy, or this idea?
Do you know, I'm a Labour MP, she's a Conservative MP. Everything she said was dead right. I back 100% Theresa May.
Excellent. Lembit?
I think that if you look at the realities here, there's a great plus from the internet. It's a free form of information. It's very hard to censor. I think that's added value to society as a whole. The minus is stuff like this, but let's keep it in perspective. Most young people who look at that site will not do a stupid thing. There's a small number of people who do. So let's not panic about this. Let's not use this as an excuse to censor one of the most valuable intellectual resources that the human race has ever known. But let's make sure, once again, this education point, the consequences of taking this approach are important. And as Theresa said, let's not encourage the sexualisation of people when they should really still be growing up.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone, and thank you for watching YP PMQs. Cheers.